All right, very good. It's official. We're on the podcast.
Wow, exciting.
So let me just do the introductions here for the purposes of introductions. Okay, my name is Rial LaPlane. I'm an author and founder of International Writers Inspiring Change, and I do book reviews now for them,
Nice.
and I'm also the host of the podcast.
Okay.
And today we have Mary Ellen Humphrey, right? That's how we say it, is it? Or
That's correct.
you say
Yes.
okay, Mary Ellen Humphrey, and we're calling you from where? Western New York?
Yes, I'm in Westfield, New York, which is not too far from Erie, Pennsylvania. So, yes, Western.
Okay, okay, very good. So you're basically 6 hours behind us. We're over here in Sweden. That's where
Oh
our
my
headquarters
goodness.
is. Yeah, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, that's where we run our operation from. We like the meatballs, you know. No,
Yeah, yes. Yeah, and other things.
and other things. So, okay, great, great to have you on the podcast. And this is officially called the Author Shout Out Podcast. Just a catchy name. So, uh, we featured you in the past. We've actually done a feature on you as an author. We've also, I've actually read one or two of your books. I think I did one or two reviews
Yeah, I think you
earlier
did.
on.
Hmm.
Probably, I think it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was a
Uh,
few years ago. Yeah,
right. I think it was the book I read was Faith.
correct.
And
I have a
I
copy
may have
right
also,
here.
that's the one, exactly.
Yes.
And then I think I may have also read Sin.
No Sin. Yep. I don't
No
have that one
Sin.
here,
Yeah,
but yes.
good.
Yeah.
All right, well, so there you go. There's some introduction. So tell us a little bit about Mary Ellen Humphrey. Who is she?
Who am I? I'm still trying to figure that out. I retired here to Western New York about 5 or 6 years ago. I lived in New Hampshire most of my adult life, and I'm originally from Maine. And so I like to tell folks on a good day, I'm a Mainer, and on a bad day, I'm a maniac. So let's hope it's a good day. I started writing seriously when my children went off to college, so in the early 90s. If you do the math, you'll figure out how old I am.
Mm.
And I discovered that I really enjoy writing myself, but I also get a tremendous amount of satisfaction from helping other people make their books a reality. So for a number of years when I lived in New Hampshire, I did a workshop all around the state called How to Hold in Your Hands the Book in Your Heart. And this was pre-print on demand, pre-CreateSpace
Mm.
and Amazon with their platform, and then, of course, now a whole bunch of other platforms. And and I got a tremendous amount of satisfaction from that. I also started a writers group, the Chichester Writers Group, which every year put together an anthology. And we did this with the notion that we were preserving our stories. A lot of the members were older people. And so we were preserving the stories, but we would create these chapbooks back then, and we would make extra copies to leave in places where people would read them. So think dentist office, doctor's offices, garages while your car is being fixed and that sort of thing.
You mean you would print out chapters or the whole book and leave them around?
The whole book. We'd leave the whole book with all our stories every year.
That's great.
And the state librarian in New Hampshire contacted me and asked if she could archive our books. So we have several volumes archived at the state library in New Hampshire. So when I moved here to New York as a retired person, I started looking for a writing community. I had the opportunity to attend the Maui Writers Conference back in 1999. It made a huge impact on my sense of the writing world and how we as writers really need to encourage and support one another. So,
What's the name of that writers group you said?
well,
What?
the one I went to in Maui was the Maui Writers Conference, but
Oh,
the
Maui,
just
Hawaii. We're talking
it
about.
was in Hawaii. Yeah, my son was stationed there, so I used it as a 2-for-1.
Uh,
So anyway, it impressed me so much, and so now as a retired person living in Western New York, I'm looking for a really good writing community. And what's happened is I'm sort of building that. I'm working with the Lakeshore Center for the Arts here in Westfield, New York, I've been their writing director for several years now, and we have a writers group. We have a annual contest that we do. They have a one-act play that is internationally known now. It's really something. And so the whole motto is to create a supportive and nurturing writing community. And so that's kind of who I am. I started writing books back in I think my first book was in 97, 96 or 97. And
Oh,
then
which book was that? Is
it
that
was
one of the
called
published books?
it was called Out of Season. It's out of print now. It was
Okay.
a New Hampshire mystery and adventure, and kind of a typical first book. It wasn't, I'm not terribly proud of it, but it was pretty good. And then I went from there to some nonfiction books. I wrote a book about some things that were happening in New Hampshire. We had an impeachment trial of our Supreme Court Chief Justice. So I have a wide variety of books that I've done, including family histories but I love to do fiction. I love to write fiction. And the book you mentioned, Faith, that is probably my most important work because it took me decades to write that book. It's based on everything in there is based on actual experiences. And I struggled with whether
Is that your actual experiences or?
yes, and I struggled whether to write it as a memoir or, a story or how to do it. It took me a long time. And I decided to do it as a fictional story for a couple of reasons. One was because there's so many characters. I couldn't
Mm,
do 200 characters in a book. So I made composites of characters. And the second really most important reason is because I didn't feel it was fair for me to out other people who were in a cult. Okay, I can say I was because I was a teenager and got sucked into this thing, but I didn't want to embarrass anybody else. So I wrote it as fiction. And I've gotten some really amazing feedback on that book because former members go through a certain trauma when you decompress and come out of a group like that. And it's very helpful to understand how you got into it and what happens to other people, that you're not alone. And
mm.
I think it also helps family members and loved ones to understand, how did your friend or your relative get involved in this? And I like to say, you don't wake up one day and say, gee, I think I'll join a cult today. It doesn't work that
Right,
way.
right.
You get sucked in, and there's all kinds of cults. There's the religious we think of, the shaved heads and the robes and all that, but there's political cults, there's business cults, there's organizations that take over your mind, take over your thinking and thought process, and
Right.
trap you in a way that you can't really escape without something. Something has to help you. And
Yeah.
that book is probably my most important work as far
I
as
was very impressed with the book because, I mean, I have some history with cults too. I understand the phenomena. The thing is that they tend to love bomb you in and then make you feel like you're part of a unique family. And
it's
but
a
it's interesting when I was reading your book and comparing it to also other books I've read on the subject or documentaries. A lot of people think or assume that people who get involved with cults are broken people or traumatized or have problems, and it's just not true.
it's true.
They
Yeah.
tend to focus on young people who are, you know,
Mhm.
vulnerable, but for being young. But beyond that, they're normal people.
When you're young and a bit naive, and if you have something that, maybe you don't fit in, maybe your family's got issues. In my case, divorce in the 60s was pretty,
Mm,
not as common as it is today, and mental illness in a family can cause problems. And so you look for something that gives you an anchor. You look for something that you can hang on to. And I think for most people, that was the experience with this particular cult. And, they tell you, that it's all about doing really good things. You're going to save the
mm,
world. You're in. I was one of these kids who thought, gee, I'd like to do something important with my life. I'd like to be involved in something bigger than myself, those kind of words. And so this was an organization that promised that. Unfortunately, it's a bait and switch. And you know this if you've been involved with cults, that what they tell you is not at all what you're going to get into. But you don't know that until you reach a certain point of indoctrination where it's very hard to go back. And
That's right.
if an organization, some of the red flags, if an organization tells you, well, we're going to invite you to our meeting, but you can't invite anybody else. You can't tell anybody else. That's a big red flag. And of course, they'll justify it by saying they're not ready, they don't understand the truth, or, they'll give you some malarkey.
Right.
And so if somebody has that issue going on, stop and think about where you're going, what you're doing. Who
Yeah.
are these
I think
people?
I think the message in faith is good, but it's also, it's pretty, what's the word? It's pretty real. You feel the
Yeah,
pain that these girls are going through
yeah. There
in
really
this.
were three girls. And
Yeah, yeah.
they really, bad things happened. People who are,
Were the
well,
personalities of the characters that you built in the book based on people you were actually with?
yes, yes,
Yeah,
pretty much, yeah.
yeah.
And
Okay.
I mean, I couldn't do everyone. Like I said, there's 100, 200
Mhm.
people, but I couldn't include everyone, but I could include the general events that happened. And, people died, people committed suicide, people didn't get medical care, children suffered, bad things happened. And the irony of it is that you think you're in a really Christian environment. So everything's supposed to be good, right? You think
Right.
I'm marrying a Christian man, I'm going to have a good life and all this stuff. And it ends up being the opposite. It ends up being a disaster. The
Which is
first
part of
person,
the part of the
yeah, the
trap
first
that
one.
you said, is that they create this impression that everything you're doing is the greatest good. You're bettering the world. So you feel like the sacrifice has to be made because
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what
And
they.
it didn't become apparent immediately what their goals were.
Mm,
And that's by design. Because if somebody came up to you and said, join my church, and we're going to require you to pay, 30 or 40% of your income, and we're going to require you to do all these crazy things, and you can't have anything to do with your family, and nobody loves you but us. And if they told you that right up front, you'd run away, right? You'd say,
yeah, you walk
whoa,
away.
let me out of
Exactly.
here. But
Yeah.
they don't do that. They
Mm,
do it very subtly and very gradually, and they spoon feed you a little more and a little more and a little more, kind of getting you vaccinated to what they're actually doing to you. And we see this. I mean, sometimes it's a small group. The one I was in was a larger one. It was a pretty big group, but there are all kinds of them out there, and they're still out there. And I
yeah,
hate to see people trapped in a situation, because there's a part of you that knows something isn't right. You can't quite, you basically, you're told, don't trust your own thinking, right? You can't
that's
trust
right.
your mind. So how
Yeah.
do you get out of a cult if you can't trust your own
Yeah,
mind?
because if you did trust your own mind, you wouldn't stay for another
Right.
minute.
It's a no-brainer. But when things start to pile up, sometimes you have an opportunity to escape. And that's what happened to me. And the last straw for me was when Jim Jones took all those people to Guyana, and 900 people drank purple Kool-Aid. And I looked at my husband and my friends, and I literally went to all of my fellow members of this cult, and I said, if the apostle told us to drink purple Kool-Aid, would you do it? Would you make your children drink it? Would it? And their reaction shocked me, but it was the reaction of a cult member. It was, how
Did they
dare you?
actually say they would do
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, they would say, how dare you question my loyalty? We must
Wow.
obey God's apostle no matter what, right or wrong. And that was it for me. I mean, I had been part of this to that same degree, but hearing that just was like a smack in the face, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough.
Wow. Yeah, because they really, cults just normalize what's
Yeah,
crazy. They
yes, they
normalize it,
do.
and then
They
they
do.
make you internalize it so that you believe them over your own
Yeah.
ability to think freely. Yeah.
Sometimes I think to myself, why did I go through all this? What good did it possibly do me? But I have to say that it does give you it teaches you caution. It teaches you to question
Mm,
things that may sound right, but you got to go, wait a minute, maybe there's more to this. And I think
mm,
I'm also a retired college professor, and I taught writing for a while. And I always brought into my classroom um, critical thinking skills. So if you're writing an
right.
article ask yourself questions. Who else might know something that this person doesn't? How do you read this with an objective mind? And teaching people what the fallacies are, the logical fallacies and all that sort of stuff. I think we need that, especially with all the information, disinformation, misinformation. Who knows what's right anymore? And so we got to be even more uh, vigilant in controlling what we believe, what comes into our mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on, you said that, it's not just a religious cult, there's political cults, the ideological cults, there's business cults.
Yeah.
This is an interesting point because, I mean, obviously we see that with sort of the political jingoism that's going on around the world. You've got the far left, the far right, and people following this. But when it really comes down to it, even people that march off into wars are following a cult, in a
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
It's
It,
some
it's
ideology that they bought into that really like, hey, I'm going to go off and kill people.
it's sort of a malignancy of the groupthink process. When
Yes,
you're in a group, you want to all agree because we all like to feel safe in
yes,
a group. But when you get something evil, something bad,
yeah,
making everybody in a group think that way, that's very scary. That's when bad
yeah,
things happen. And
yeah.
we always have to be vigilant to question. I guess our generation was the first one to say question authority, but we were right. We had something there that we needed to stop and say, just because you read it in a newspaper or just because you read it on the internet or somebody who sounds like an authority says it doesn't necessarily make it so.
So
And
you sort of revealed yourself. You're sort of part of the anti-establishment movement of the 70s.
I guess I became that.
Yes, I understand.
School of Hard Knocks,
I was in that club too. I understand.
I'm a proud member.
Yeah, you still
Yeah.
carry the colors. Well, it's interesting. I'm just going to circle back to a question I had, which was going to be later in the podcast, but I think it's appropriate. So you'd mentioned that you did these classes to teach people how to write and to publish their books. And you wrote a book which caught my attention because I hadn't seen it on was when I was studying it for the podcast. I noticed it. It's called "You Are Not an Imposter."
Yes, it's actually a short story. I put
Okay,
it into a book form so I could make copies for all my writer friends at Christmas time. And it was funny. How do you get inspiration, right? I was doing something and all of a sudden I was thinking about the characters in my book, in my various books, because I've written like 20 books now. So I started thinking about them and someone had said to me they were experiencing imposter syndrome, which we all do, right? Well, maybe you don't, but I do. Am I really a writer? I mean, yeah, yeah. And so I had this kind of vision of my characters um, having a celebration, like a lifetime achievement award, and where they were all there to celebrate with me, and
that
it
you
was
were
so
a
much
writer. They
fun.
were celebrating your authorship.
Yeah, they were giving me the award for making them real.
Great idea.
Yeah, it was
Great
fun.
idea.
It was a fun project, but it was mostly for my writer friends to
Uh,
give them something to inspire them to understand that we all feel that imposter syndrome. But if you've created characters, you're not an imposter. They're not what their answer to me was, well, we're real. Just because you don't think we're real, we're still real.
mm.
So
I thought, our perspective from International Writers Inspiring Change, the name of the group is that we feel that all authors inspire in one way or another, whatever genre, whatever message, whatever kind of book they write. There's always somebody that's going to get inspired by it or affected.
yeah,
So I don't think anybody is an imposter, like you say. But we do go through that process. We have to sort of.
yes. Well, anytime I doubt myself, I just read that little story and I feel better.
That's great. I'm going to read it. I'm
Oh,
going
you
to read it.
are? Okay.
I will do that. So you told us what prompted you to write. I also noticed that I'm not familiar with this. I've seen this particular group, but I'm not familiar with how it works exactly. The NaNoWriMo.
NaNoWriMo, yeah. And unfortunately, they recently dissolved. I started with them about 18, 19 years ago. The
Mm.
whole goal was to write a 50,000 word first draft of a book in 30 days, November 1st to November 30th. And I did that for 18 years. Now, some of those first drafts were nothing more than a writing exercise and throw it in the trash when you're done. But
Mm.
probably half of them ended up being first drafts that I later went on and worked on revision and still revising several of them because something about 30 days, and sometimes I would have a story in mind, but most of the time I didn't know what I was going to write. So it was a really fun writing exercise. Now, some people
Mm.
wouldn't say that was fun because 50,000 words in 30 days is quite a lot. It's
Do you,
1,600
do you, do you,
words a
did,
day.
did you find that writing under pressure, like a time constraint,
Yeah,
helped you to actually write better, or?
it forced me to get the first draft done. The first draft is often just sit down and write it. If you have an outline or if you have notes, that's great. But some of my books, you mentioned No Sin, Last Right, they're speculative fictions. They're based on an idea. And I
Mm.
usually sit down when I start to see this idea forming in my brain, and I just make a list on a piece of, regular tablet of paper of what I'm seeing each scene, you know. And so that's what I start with when I write that first draft. And 50,000 words is a good first draft because then you can go back and you can read it and see what it needs, what it doesn't need, and flesh it out more. But that's
Exactly.
so I was kind of
Exactly.
doing that before Nano, but when I saw Nano, I jumped on that because that fit me. It doesn't fit everyone, but it fit a lot of people. And I'm sorry to see it's not going to be happening again in November. But as some of my writer friends have said, you can do that anytime. You don't have to do it in November. And that's a hard month for a lot of people because it's, Thanksgiving and all that other stuff. So I may end up doing it again another month. But anyway, it's interesting you mentioned that because that was pretty fun.
Yeah, I was just curious how that affected. I noticed when I was reading your bio, which we on your Amazon site, uh, you mentioned that when you write a book, you have to get the whole concept clearly in your head,
Mhm.
of what
Yeah.
the story is about, I guess how it ends, everything before you sit down and uh, write it up. Does that in any way take away the passion of the book, of writing the
No,
story when you
what
know?
I what I see in my mind, and this is going to sound a little hairy, but what I actually see is the book. Okay, so I see
Mm.
the beginning of the book, and then there's this book, and there's the ending, and I know what that plot line is, but I don't know what the whole story is. But I have to see that book, and sometimes I'll even stop and make a mock-up, like I might take a book and just make a cover and see what
Mm.
that book is. Because you don't always know what the title's going to be when you first start. Usually that comes
Right.
later in a book. You don't know who all the characters are, but you have a premise. I can give you an example. It was in 2014 when I was writing a Nano project, and I had just finished reading On Writing, which was written by Stephen King. And I'm not really a Stephen King avid fan. I've read some of his books, but they're not necessarily my kind of books. But his writing advice was intriguing to me. He said, take characters you know and a setting you know, and let them tell the story. And I knew that I wanted to write a book about a spoof of the New Hampshire legislature. You have to know, New Hampshire is a very political state. So I wanted to write a spoof on the New Hampshire legislature. And I knew that it was going to be kind of, it was going to include ghosts in the state house. It was going to include kind of a murder. It was going to have all these fun little things. But in the process of writing the story, it was going to show you what politics is like. My
Mm.
original title was Politics 101. Then it was The State House Mystery. And then it ended up being Politics and Poltergeist. But anyway, I took his advice. I had no idea how the book was going to end. I wasn't even sure how it was going to develop, but I did what he said. Created the characters I knew, the setting I knew, and that think Mr. Smith Goes to Washington meets Murder She Wrote meets Rod Serling. So that was all I had. And then I sat down and I wrote my 30 days, and I got to day 29, and there was a murder, and I had no idea who did it, who I didn't know the answer. And I said to myself, well, he said to trust your characters, and I don't know, so I'm going to just say to my subconscious, let me know how this ends. And I went to bed, and the next morning I had the ending, And it surprised even me. So having fun with writing, I want to have fun with this. And that's kind of
Yeah,
what I do with a lot of my books.
that's a great process.
Yeah,
That's a
it's
great
fun.
process. Do you ever like dream about the story and it comes together in a dream mode at all? Or is it usually,
I have friends who tell me that they do have dreams that they base their books on, but maybe my life has just been kind of bizarre enough that I don't have to dream it.
I
Um,
understand.
I can't say that I do, but I can tell you that I have on several occasions been stumped with a book and trusting my brain to figure it out. Like, go to bed and just say, you figure it out. I'm going to get up tomorrow and see what happens. Many times the answer will come
That
to me.
works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I may have struggled for months trying to figure out a scene or a chapter, but then I do this process and I just let go and let my
Yeah.
brain figure it out. It's
It's just
processing behind the scenes all the time, right? So it works for me.
like rebooting the mental machinery, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Trust yourself.
Oh, you mentioned that you do write in different genres. Was that intentional, or did you just sort of find yourself creeping into the other boxes and going, "Oh, I want to do
I
this
don't
kind
think
of."
I don't think I've got a clear identity of a genre writer. I like experimenting with my writing.
Yep.
Now, when I wrote Faith, before I could finish even write this book, I went and got my master's degree in education with especially in writing because I didn't feel adequate to write the book. It was very
Mm,
important to me to write this book. I will say that thank you. That was very nice to do, but it really didn't change the book. I'm the same writer I was. I may have some
right.
sophistication, but
Right.
the story is still the story that I would have written. And I learned something by that. I like to experiment. I've done some, you know, I don't know if you would call it speculative, but my latest book is about a woman who befriends a tree. And she talks
No,
to this tree.
I saw that title on Amazon.
Plant people,
Another
yeah.
interesting.
I just finished it. I've only had a couple people who've read it and they've said they really liked it. But I think of the genre as a young adult book for baby boomers. It's a fun book. It's not intended to be, um, uh, sophisticated, but it's fun and it's thoughtful. And there's a lot of talk right now about trees and
Um,
sentient plants. And I've always loved hiking and being outdoors and I have favorite trees. So it wasn't hard for me to write the story. Um, I don't know if you saw it, but I'll just read you the tagline. Rita Wellstone is a newly retired woman who saves the world from plant-based aliens and giant UFOs. How does she do that? She talks to trees. How cool is that? So that's one way I go. And then, as I say, I've done nonfiction.
yeah, it's great. I love that. I
Yeah, I
love that.
just do whatever my heart desires.
Okay, well, just on a personal side again, just one last thing before I ask another couple questions here. Given the early history with the cult and the effect that had on your life, obviously, and
Yeah.
escaping it, would you say that writing has been cathartic for
Oh,
you?
absolutely. It's saved me. It's been um, therapeutic. It's been
Mm.
helping me make sense of the world. And I think that's why I actually started writing when I was a little girl. I got my first diary, I think at 6 years old, and I was writing, Dear Diary, I played with my brothers today or something, It was a way for me to try to make sense out of the world I lived in. And then as I got older, I love now that I can go back to journals from 30 years ago. And, someone was asking me one day about the anniversary of 9/11. Well, because I am a journaler, I go back to my journal and I can read exactly what happened to me that day.
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
discovered that we often remember the emotions of an event, but we don't remember the details,
Yeah.
at least
Yeah.
for me. I thought things happened in a different order than when I had gone back and read it. But I had the feelings correct. All of the emotional responses were there and the pieces were there, but just not in the right order. So having having a journal is almost like a friend. It's a confidant. It's somebody that I can, or something that I can write anything I want in, and then think about that and figure it out. And it's taken me a lifetime to figure out some of the things that the cult, for example, how did I get into that? What happened? Why me? And it's very obvious why me, but not to me. So I have to figure it out. And I
No, I
always
understand.
encourage people to keep a journal and write, even if you don't want to write for people to read, write for yourself. It's
Yes, yes, exactly.
extremely powerful. It will empower you.
Mm.
Another use for writing journals is plan to plan out what you want to do. If you want to do something, if you want to write a book, like I said, I have to see the book in my head. Well, it's kind of like, think if you're going to go on a trip. Where are you going? I don't know. How are you going to get there? I don't know. Well, you got to plan it out. You got to think, here's where I want to go. Here's my destination. Here's why I want to do this. This is why I want to write this book. And then you start to flesh it in and fill it out. And if you do that, if you can see the book, if you can see the goal that you have a much better chance of achieving that goal or
Right,
something
exactly.
that goes with that goal. So
Exactly.
that's,
So like having a construct there so that
mhm,
then you can start filling in
yeah,
the structure inside.
yeah, right.
Well, you answered one of my questions, which I was going to ask you what your advice would be to new novel novices in the field. And you already answered that very well. So, writing the book for yourself is a very common answer to that question when I ask experienced authors, what would you advise? And they say, write the book, write the story that you want to, that you would read, that you would
Yeah.
like to read. Because otherwise and generally they will say, there's sort of in their perception of it, there's two kinds of authors. There's the author that write to make money and they just sort of mark it into a sort of a specific, reading group. And then
Mhm.
there's the other ones that write stories they just want to write.
I was telling somebody the other day that every book I have written, I have a shelf in my living room with my books on it, and I just love to read them. I said
It's fun to do that.
it sounds vain, but I write the books I like. I
Yeah.
don't write for the marketplace. I don't have to. I don't need to make money at it. And people who read the books seem to like them, but I'm not saying to myself, well, what will sell tomorrow? I don't know. I'm my plant book, my plant people book. And I'm writing a companion book to go with that now. And it's just what book would I really like to read? And that's what I do. I read my books and I'm like, whoa, I still read Faith probably once a year. I read this book. And of course, this is a book that touches my heart. And every time I
Yeah.
get to the last page, I cry because it's so important. It's so moving to me how this one of the three girls escapes and gets to have a life, and it's just gives me chills. But I like to read the book. I like my books, and if no one else does, that's okay. I like them.
Well, I liked it too. So
Yeah,
there you go. I think you probably are speaking to people. I'm sure that there are people who've read the book who can relate to it. Maybe they were part of cults. Maybe they are family members who
yeah,
had people that were as close to them got involved in cults. And you just never know how the domino falls on this and who you're influencing. And I think that's the key thing here about writers. We
yeah,
have to remember that our books are timeless and they do touch people, whether it's even if it touches one person, the domino effect that has on other lives, you can never tell. How
yeah.
far does the ripple go, you
I
know?
know, I know. Think about it, for one person to contact you, how many didn't? I
That's
had
right.
some fellow from Tennessee emailed me a couple years ago. He'd read Faith, and he read it because he had read another book by someone else who I had helped edit their book, and they mentioned my book in their thank you to me or whatever. And so he decided to read my book, and he said, he said, it's the first time I've read a book that as soon as I finished it, I wanted to read it again. And he
Wow.
told me how he and his wife had almost gotten involved in this particular group. And by reading my book, they no longer have any doubt that they did the right thing to run away. So, it's just amazing.
There you go. You see, you saved a
Yeah,
life or
yeah,
more.
yeah.
Well, we're nearing the end of the podcast now, so I'm going to ask you one other question.
Yeah.
Oh, no, two questions, actually. No, I think you answered this one. You have a sequel coming out to the new book, right? That's the one you're working on.
Yes, well, it's a companion book. So this one called Plant People is about, like I told you, the woman who saves the world. The second one I'm doing is called Keepers, and it's a similar situation of a woman discovering through nature, through hiking and whatnot, a bigger view of the world. I'll put it that way. So it's a little different, but it's a companion book. Yeah.
Okay, good. So that one, so we can expect that in the near future. Is that?
Yes, I'm in the third draft stage. It's coming. Got a ways to go.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that. All right, well, so then here's my final question for you, because you are an educator and you've also been teaching people on writing and publishing, and you've done workshops. So, and I always ask this question of authors. What's your perception of, I don't want to put the words in your mouth, but given the situation we have with the digital world, streaming and mobile phones, all this other stuff, social media, where is literacy and reading heading today with the new generations?
Well, I think I'm sure someone has mentioned this to you, that this thing with AI, it's kind of concerning because it's taking already written stuff and reshuffling it, shuffling it, and spitting it back out. And I think that to be an author, to have an authentic voice, to be your own voice, to not give in to the temptation of, well, it would be easy if I used AI to help me, or something. I think it's really important that we, even if we feel like they're going way beyond our abilities, that's what worries me, is that it's going to seem so perfect when they finally figure out how to make an AI write a novel, for example.
Right.
But the human person writing the novel is so much more important, and I don't want to see us lose that as we get more and more involved in technology. Because I'm from books, paper books, and I'm from pencils. I still take notes and write first drafts with pencils and pens, and I don't know if the younger generation, as a college teacher, I discovered that a lot of the kids coming into college didn't have the same English skills, didn't have the same ability to completely write sentences, and I would always say it's your thought that you're conveying, and learning to do that with language, written language, verbal language, whatever. That's the key important piece. Your story is what's important. And AI is going to, I think, be a challenge for us as a society, as people, as human beings, to keep the value on true art. Writing is an art. Writing a story is an art. Storytelling is an art. And it's like playing the piano or creating music. Artificial intelligence may be able to put notes together and create new tunes, but it's the human connection that is so important. And I think that's probably my number one concern, is because it is so easy to get sucked into technology. And there's good technology, things to help you, but not writing books.
If it replaces
the
essence of the art, which is writing and obviously
when you think
result
about it,
of that,
we are a sum of what we've put in our brains. And when we're young and we're reading books, remember those first books, Trixie Belden and all these wonderful little books that we read that started us to realize that our mind can see the world, a different world from an author. I love Dickens, for example, because I feel like he talks to the reader. If you ever read his books, it's like, did you consider this, dear reader? And I look at my ancestors. I have an ancestor who wrote the first history of the American Revolution, and she says, I want to speak to posterity, and I'm her posterity. So she's talking to me. And we really can communicate through written words in ways that will last long beyond our existence, long beyond my existence. So those books on my shelf, those 20 books, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, somebody's 200 years from now may read them. And
That's right.
they'll
That's right.
connect with my brain. Isn't that amazing? So
Yeah,
I don't want it
yeah,
to
that's
be, I
great.
don't want it to be artificial. I want it to be real.
I think you brought up a very good point there on the whole AI thing, because that is a major concern. And given the fact that statistically the reading is not on the upswing right now with
Yeah.
the new generations, they are tending to go for the quick fix, the quick dopamine fix, TikTok and Twitter and all this other stuff, and sitting down.
Like
If you go on a bus or a subway and look at, nobody's reading a book. They're
yeah,
looking at their phones.
yeah,
They're going through social media. So
I know.
30 years ago, 40 years ago, in the 70s, when we were sitting there on a bus reading a book.
Yeah. Now
It's
they're
it's a
looking at their
missing piece
phone.
of the culture. This is a major concern on our part at IWIG. And our
We
mission.
lose skills with technology. Like when calculators came, people didn't add and subtract in their heads as much. And with computers now, it's harder for people to have the same grammar skills and literary
That's
skills.
right.
But
That's right.
I think it's really important as human beings that we treasure and value those skills and don't give up on them because a machine can do it for us.
That's right.
Eventually, the machine will do too much for us.
Well, a machine cannot replicate the past. A
Right.
machine cannot tell you what we experienced. In other words, and one author brought this up to me in an interview at the podcast. He said that what's important to him, because he writes historical fiction, is that it's on the record what happened
Yeah.
through time. And it's important that the new generations actually sit down and take the time to read those, because otherwise they will never find out about that history. They will never learn from it.
Right.
And AI can never replicate that. It can't tell you what happened to World War II, a German family, or the
No.
American soldier on the ground, because it doesn't have that memory base. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Anyhow,
I'm sorry, you've got so many, with the print on demand is a double-edged sword. It's wonderful that you can make your book. You can really make a book, but
right.
it's being so distorted and misused for get-rich-quick schemes and all kinds of crazy stuff that so many books are put out there now. It's hard for people to sort out and find really good books,
That's right. Yeah, it's very much saturated the field,
Yeah,
making it. I mean,
yeah,
as you mentioned earlier, before self-publishing and before those platforms came in,
yeah,
it was a little easier actually for authors to actually new
yeah.
authors to come into the and rise up the ladder, but it's a very saturated field right now.
Oh, yeah,
Anyhow, we really appreciate what you're doing
thank you.
at IWIC. Our mission is to promote literacy and reading,
Yeah,
quite honestly,
yeah,
and it's as a man that I really admire, Noah Webster, in his first American
from New
dictionary.
Hampshire, I believe.
Yeah, 1828, he put out the first dictionary of the
Yeah,
American language. And he said and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said in the introduction to that, that already by that time, Americans, the colonials that were there, were losing their grip on the English language. And he said his concern was that if we don't preserve the language, we will lose our constitutional rights eventually, because
yeah,
people will rewrite the meaning of the words in the Constitution, and then America will start to on a decline.
interesting. Well, it's also
And he
very
said that in
important.
1828, and I
Yeah,
was so impressed with his introduction in that dictionary that I went, yeah,
yeah,
that makes total
that's
sense.
that is really interesting. And another concern that my ancestor expressed back during the Revolution was that education, if we don't have an educated populace, our government is at risk. And,
That's right.
we really need to understand that education isn't just about having a job. It isn't just about learning to read and write. It's about being good citizens, being able to uphold our Constitution, understand it, understand what our rights are and what the three branches of government are and why they exist the way they do, because it's really brilliant the way it was set up. Is it perfect? Maybe not, but it's pretty darn good. And her concern was that it's all based on how educated we are, how moral we are as a people. And if we lose that, then our government is at risk and our country. So yeah, you're right. It's all important. They seem to understand that back then a lot more.
Yeah. Well, there were people who saw that, 200 years
Yeah.
ago. They were like looking well down that time line. Anyhow, great talking to you,
Thank
Mary
you so
Ellen.
much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. And what we'll do is we'll post this interview on our podcast page so that you can refer people. It'll be there so they can always go
Okay.
back to this and see it. We'll also email you or send you using a document transfer service, a copy of the video so you can post it to your website or pass it around to your friends and
Okay.
associates.
Super. I'll make sure it gets
Yeah.
out there.
And if you have some new books you want to have featured or reviewed, contact the iWick team, and they'll be happy to
Okay.
do it.
Well, maybe I'll send you the plant people.
There you go. We'll
It's
start
fun.
there. All right, Mary Ellen, great talking to you. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Real. Thank you.
All right. See you
Bye.
later.
Yeah, bye.